will preview all of that in a minute, but I hope you had a happy 4th of July. I did. I enjoy the patriotism of this time of year, and this year it was kind of fun. Speaking of patriotism, I wore red just to celebrate if you're watching on the internet. But on the 4th this year, it was just interesting to be happy about all the celebrations and even what was going on in Washington, D.C., but then to see all the attacks on patriotism coming from so many quarters and really playing up, I think, the absurdity of the critiques of people who just absolutely want to celebrate their nation. And I'm not going to go through all the things that happened, from Betsy Ross flag shoes pulled by Nike to the critiques of a wonderful celebration in Washington, D.C. of the 4th of July and all the rest, even going down to the soccer field. But just to say that I'm happy to be an American this 4th of July and this July, and I hope you are too. And we're going to try to play that up a little bit in the program, along with some stories of some very disturbing things that are happening. But I will say one thing that's happening today, and it's not too far from here where we sit in Dallas, and that is Obamacare is getting another day in court. The Obamacare law, the individual mandate, actually is at it's at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals right now. It's being argued, and one of the groups arguing there is the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and Rob Henneke is arguing it there because what happened was back in 2017 when the tax cuts were passed, the individual mandate for health care was abolished. At that time, it was part of the law. So a lot of folks, including Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas, and other attorneys general, have said, well, then if you don't have an individual mandate to get health insurance, then that's sort of a linchpin for Obamacare, and it actually takes away the foundation of the law. And so this is what Texas Public Policy Foundation writes today about this. Even those familiar with the Fifth Circuit find it hard to predict how the panel will land on last year's district court ruling. This was here in Texas, striking down the entire Affordable Care Act. The Washington Post reported this. The ruling from the Fifth Circuit, which can be very conservative. Kelly Shackelford will tell you that they do very well on religious liberty cases and some of the other issues that are important to us. But the Fifth Circuit ruling will have bearing on whether the Supreme Court agrees to hear yet another challenge to the Affordable Care Act. Of course, in 2012, we all know that the Supreme Court upheld most of it, and then again in 2015. And so, we've got a 3-judge panel, I believe, hearing this at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the judges that have been chosen, they aren't the furthest right. They're not the most conservative judges on the Fifth Circuit. So it's still a little bit up for grabs. The Texas Public Policy Foundation argued on behalf of individuals harmed by the Affordable Care Act. And this is what Rob Henneke says. He's their attorney. The families we represent in this case, which is now in the appeals process, lost their chosen and affordable health coverage. They lost the physicians they knew and trusted, and they lost the power to make their own decisions regarding health care. That's a side of the health care debate that we don't hear about much, but it's a very real outcome of the legislation. So that's the Texas Public Policy's part of this case, but it's also it's just on the financial foundation issue of Obamacare. Now that there's no individual mandate, can it stand? So that's going to be interesting to be watching and reporting on. Well, another piece of news, if you live in Texas, you've probably heard it already, but Ross Perot died, and that was reported by his family today. Of course, he was a billionaire, Texas entrepreneur, iconic, just political and philanthropic figure in our culture. And he was 89. And he, of course, made 2 bids for the presidency in the 1990s. And he did well because of, guess what, voter frustration with the 2 political parties. He tapped into that sentiment. And in one election, he got 19.7 million votes. He probably elected Bill Clinton. In a sense. And he was really a forerunner of the Tea Party. I think his movement was. He certainly capitalized on George H.W. Bush's Read My Lips pledge, which he broke. And Ross Perot made hay of that. And he also, of course, before that, made a fortune twice over, starting 2 software companies, EDS and also Perot Systems, sold both of them for billions of dollars. He used his money. He was a philanthropist, and you can see the Perot name on different hospital wings around town. But also, he would use his money often to free hostages in areas around the world, Lebanon, Vietnam. He even rescued, and he got criticized by the State Department, but he rescued 2 employees from an Iranian prison, 2 of his employees. He had the means to do that. He was famously an opponent of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And if you were watching that election, you remember he had all kinds of charts showing us why that was not going to be good for the country. And, some people still don't think it is, including our president, President Trump. In 1992, and this goes back to one of his runs for the presidency, he was leading in the polls, 39%. Bush at 31%. This is George H.W. Bush, and Clinton at 25%, and he dropped out. Then later he got back in, but he basically kind of lost his momentum, and he didn't carry any states. Then the next election, he ran on the Reform Party ticket, but I think by then everything about him was a little bit more of a caricature, and he wasn't taken as seriously, and so he didn't do so well in that election. But that's Ross Perot, and he's left his mark here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, also in the state of Texas, and certainly across the nation. We're going to get to another story having to do with an entrepreneur after the break, but I do want to mention also that later in the program, we're going to talk about why Texans are getting so many people moving in from blue states like New York and California. And one former state legislator from California who has now become a Texan, Chuck DeVore, will join me. And then also Tim Winter from the Parents Television Council. He's also out there in L.A., but he is working, it's a hard job, but to try to clean up television. And it's just a massive undertaking. But we're going to go to one of the worst shows out there. It started in June, called Euphoria, introduced by HBO. And just, it's so hard now as a parent to be able to control what your kids do because they're streaming. And we will talk about all of that with Tim Winter from Parents Television Council. So stay with us. We've got so much to cover today on Point of View. You won't want to miss any of it. And you could even listen online if you're away from your radio. So we'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When you were in civics class, you probably learned this formulation. The legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch carries out laws, and the judicial branch interprets laws. Justice Neil Gorsuch is using various Supreme Court opinions to return back to that constitutional order. Part of the problem is that various members of Congress have been willing to cede power to the executive branch. Sometimes that makes sense when bureaucrats need to have some discretion in how to implement certain rules and regulations. In most cases, Congress has decided to abdicate its rule in our republic. One notable example was the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare. On page after page, you could read phrases like, "as the Secretary shall determine." The Secretary of HHS was given enormous power and authority in how to implement the law. Her department ended up issuing 12,000 pages of regulations based on the original law. In a number of opinions, Justice Gorsuch has been essentially saying to Congress, do your job. In his latest opinion, he criticizes Congress for writing a vague federal statute dealing with prison sentences. His argument is that a vague law is no law at all. He criticizes lawmakers for statutory language that provides no reliable way to determine which offenses qualify as crimes of violence. I predict this problem with Congress will get worse. One member of Congress that I interview warns about these message bills written by Democrats in the House. The bills are poorly written because they are merely intended to send a message. They don't expect the Senate to approve them or for the president to sign them. As more and more of these vague bills are passed, the sloppiness will extend to other important pieces of legislation. So Justice Gorsuch will have his work cut out for him. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I told you it was a busy show today, and I did forget to mention one guest who's coming up actually at the bottom of the hour. In this hour, his name is Don Blythe, and he is a Christian abolitionist. He's been in the pro-life movement for 35 years, and I know there are a lot of people like that who have just been working the trenches of the pro-life movement. He says that under his ministry, about 4,000 babies have been saved, and he's been arrested 5 times. And we'll just talk to him about the pro-life movement, some of his stories, and that will be fun. That will be in the next half hour. But I do want to get back to another sort of philanthropist, entrepreneur, person who is actually retired, but now is taking the fruits of his labor and giving it away. And this is Bernie Marcus. He is the founder of Home Depot. And Home Depot shoppers, some of them, are threatening to boycott Home Depot, even though he's out of there now, because of his support of Donald Trump. Bernie Marcus gave $7 million to spending groups and PACs supporting Donald Trump in 2016. And he has just announced that he plans to give 80 to 90% of his wealth away after he dies. It's going to go to a foundation that will have philanthropic opportunities. His fortune is estimated to be about $4.53 billion. That's estimated by Bloomberg. Forbes says $5.8 billion. He says he doesn't know how much he has. But he will be donating to Donald Trump's 2020 reelection campaign in a big way through PACs. And who knows, he may form his own PAC. But a lot of enraged customers on social media say they're going to boycott Home Depot because of this. They have about $108 billion in annual sales. And these folks say they're going to cut up their cards and go shop at Lowe's and other places. And Kelly Shackelford actually sent me this article because we've had some people in the conservative movement kind of looking, especially folks that live in Atlanta, where I think Home Depot may be headquartered there, but at least he's there. And they say, well, yes, he founded the company with 2 others, and he's conservative, but the other founders are generally, they split off from him in politics. So they're not all conservative. So to punish Home Depot for what this one entrepreneur is doing now in his retirement doesn't seem really fair. He is no longer CEO. He retired. From Home Depot, though, when you think about that company, hundreds, because of the way it's set up, hundreds, even thousands of people have become millionaires. Some people have become multi-millionaires by being associated with Home Depot. Bernie Marcus retired 15 years ago, and this is him personally donating. And I will say, I just think it's a great company because I'm not very handy, and neither is my husband. I hope he's not listening, but no, he'll admit it. And we have to, if we have a home project, if we don't get a handyman or somebody to fix it for us, we have to go there and get advice and get help on how to do whatever it is. And they are so wonderful and have been over the many years of our marriage. And so we appreciate them. And now they do something else that's so wonderful, and that is these little workshops for children. And my kids take their kids to Home Depot. I think it's about once a month. They hold these little workshops. They'll have a kit that's all bundled together of things you need to do your particular project. And for instance, I think they made a bird feeder one day. And they came, my grandkids are like 2 and 3 years old, came home with these little bird feeders that they had made, and they were able to accomplish something and feel that, they could do that. They were taught to do it, and a lot of it they can do themselves, even when they're little. It's very well planned. They put a little orange apron on each child and let them do this. And this is done at Home Depots all over the nation. It's a wonderful initiative. So, if you want to boycott something like that, fine, because somebody that founded it is funding Donald Trump's candidacy. More power to you, I guess. You can go ahead and do that. But I just wanted to report on that. And speaking of another billionaire, Tom Steyer, one on the left, is making, he's actually signaling that he will join the Democrat race and run for president. And, of course, one just dropped out. I don't know if you saw the news yesterday. Eric Swalwell of California, he's a member of Congress, I think 4 terms, very much on the left. He decided he wasn't going to even make the debate stage next time. He decided to drop out. And someone is taking his place, though. They're not winnowing the field. Tom Steyer will probably join, and he is a billionaire. And he's famously been behind impeaching Trump. That's one of his biggest initiatives. Another one is just climate change. He's very, very much supporting all kinds of environmental restrictions and just, that kind of movement that lets government control everything you do in the name of stopping climate change. And he's really a super donor to causes and candidates. And as I said, it's going to be interesting because he's going to be talking about getting President Trump impeached, and that will be his number one initiative. So he'll bring something else, and he will probably be able to get to the debate stage. On money, he certainly will, and just because he does have some name recognition out there. So we'll see another candidate. Won't that be fun? I wanted to mention something else, too, because there's a new book out. Some of you may have been hearing about this. It's by Molly Hemingway and Carrie Severino. Carrie's been a frequent guest here on Point of View. She's from the Judicial Crisis Network. She's all about getting the president's nominees to the courts. If it's a president who's nominating strict constructionist type justices, she's all about getting them confirmed. And her organization raises and spends millions of dollars to do that. And so she was very much involved in the Kavanaugh hearings, and Molly Hemingway also in reporting on this. Well, they've gotten together now that that's a year past us. They wrote a book, and they're out now on the circuit doing interviews about their book. Well, I don't have them in the studio, although I would love to. But I do have a piece of information out of their book that I thought was quite interesting, because you all remember Christine Blasey Ford, who testified that, she was attacked by Kavanaugh, and that, all sorts of things happened that a lot of us don't believe. Well, now it turns out in this book, Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court by Carrie Severino and Molly Hemingway, they interviewed more than 100 people for this book. And they found out that Christine Blasey Ford, she was kind of a party girl herself. And she was famous for her drinking escapades and for kind of pursuing boys, in high school. I mean, kind of that kind of a girl, which we never heard anything about during the hearings. But some of these classmates at the Holden Arms Girls' School began to reveal some of the things they knew about her to these 2 gals that wrote the book. And so, it's just a little bit interesting. I'm not going to give any more facts than that. I think you'd have to read the book to find out. But that was something I never heard. She portrayed herself as somebody who was very innocent, shy, and quiet. And, she may not have been loose, but she certainly was not shy and quiet. And she was a little bit on the aggressive side, some of her classmates said. So in one sense, it's kind of fun and funny to look back on that. Well, I do want to mention that next up we're going to talk about the sanctity of human life and how we, this one guest that we have, Don Blythe, is working on bringing back a culture of life in the country. We certainly have talked a lot about that in recent weeks, having to do with what states are doing and the laws that are being passed. But there's much more that can be done. And this man goes across the country and tries to do that. He tries to be persuasive with regard to not only the sanctity of human life, but also the necessity to come to Christ as your Savior and to walk with Him. And those two things go together so often. Sometimes when someone is facing a crisis, pregnancy, a time where they've got some challenges facing them for their future, that's a good time to be thinking about the things of the Lord, and that's what Don Blythe helps folks do. So you won't want to miss that. And then a little bit later, of course, we'll talk about why Californians and New Yorkers are moving to Texas, and then after that, we will talk about what is Hollywood doing, sexualizing our children. Why are we letting it happen? So stay with us. We will also be taking your calls throughout the program. We don't want you to neglect the phones because we love that. We've got a busy show, lots of guests, but all of them know that we're a live talk show, and we enjoy the participation of our callers. So our number, of course, is 800-351-1212, and we will try to take those calls as quickly as we can as we go throughout the program. So stay with us, and also we've got articles that go with each guest that will help you to learn more about the topic, and you can go to pointofview.net. The donate button is also there. Please take advantage of that. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Packed show today on Point of View. We were discussing Home Depot, and Doug, who's doing our technical producing today, came in and told me that Home Depot also, and I didn't know this, but they're all about hiring vets that have come back from service, and they're very good about doing that. And they give them 10% off on everything. So that's another quality characteristic of Home Depot, who now certain people are boycotting them because he plans on giving a lot of money to the Trump campaign for 2020. Now I want to introduce to you a guest, and his name is Don Blythe. He's actually been in ministry for 35 years, and he's all about rescuing those being led to death. He's in the pro-life movement, in other words, and he has many stories. His ministry estimates that 4,000 babies have been saved through it. He himself has been arrested 5 times, so he's put himself on the line. Don, thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, I appreciate being on with the lady who has the coolest name in radio.
Well, thank you very much. I know. Are you in California? Is that where you're based?
Yes, I'm actually right now. I'm sitting in my van, but I'm outside of the Planned Parenthood in Walnut Creek, which is just on the other side of Berkeley, California.
Well,
so
that gives us a good
now.
visual to understand what your ministry is all about. So what are your plans there for your day at Planned Parenthood?
Well, we actually have cards and information for the local pregnancy help center here, which is called Options for Women, and they even have a mobile unit. But we actually try to encourage the women and the couples that are going into this particular Planned Parenthood abortion clinic to go over to Options for Women, get a free ultrasound, and get the loving help and attention that they need. This is an abortion clinic that actually does abortions up to 20 weeks, and it's kind of the main center in this East Bay section of the Bay Area. And so they get a lot of business here. And I don't know if you guys probably have spoken about it on the radio. California a few years ago passed a law that you no longer have to be a doctor to actually perform abortion. So we're starting to see more ambulances show up at the abortion centers. Wow. And we take pictures and get the information because we're noticing less and less times. We pretty much know who the abortionists are that come in, and when they're not here, we're thinking, we've got nurses performing the abortions, and sure enough, we'll, not every week, but on occasion, we'll see an ambulance show up to take a wounded woman to the hospital because of the damage that was done to them. And so it's an interesting place, and one of the best things about what's been going on recently is with the movie Unplanned, it has really stirred a lot of people up, and we're seeing more people starting to come out and join us at the abortion centers.
Really?
Not large groups, but 2 or 3 here or 2 or 3 there will show up and say, I saw the movie Unplanned and it so rattled me. I found out where the local abortion center was and wanted to come out and just see what's going on and get a feel for it. And you can tell these people are really moved that they've never really done anything pro-life before. And so that's been a real blessing and real positive impact of the movie Unplanned, to see the results of people actually coming out. And
that was my first experience in the pro-life movement. I actually am from California. And in the early days of my marriage, my husband and I would go out with a group called, I'm sure you're familiar with, called Operation Rescue. And we would go to abortion clinics, and we had little kids. We didn't go. People would actually lock arms and stop people from going in. We didn't do that. We just prayed on the outskirts. because we didn't want to risk arrest. Now, you have been arrested over the years a few times, haven't you?
Yes. In fact, you and I probably ran into each other back
Perhaps.
there in the day, because I hooked up with the Operation Rescue folks and would do the sidewalk counseling when everybody was blocking the building. I would be looking for the couples that weren't able to get in and walk over to their cars and try to encourage them to change their minds and go to a pregnancy help center. But I did the San Francisco clinics and the Bay Area clinics. And so, yeah, it just the impact that we have, we think, oh boy, we're losing this battle. But then all of a sudden, the Lord brings something up like the movie Unplanned, and it just re-stirs people to get more involved. So we're really thankful for that, because there really aren't too many people out in front of most abortion centers. It's usually just a handful of people. So,
Don, what do you do when people come and want to help? How do you direct them? What do you have them do? Because I know that, there is a lot of pro-life sentiment out there. And a lot of us, a lot of people work in the side of legislation, or, we're praying for the courts to do the right thing. But you're out there on the front lines. So if somebody were to come and they were encouraged, for instance, by Seeing Unplanned, they want to do something, how do you get them on track and kind of into the ministry that you're doing?
Well, that's a good question. We kind of talked to the person about what motivated them, what inspired them to come out. And then we start talking to them about, this is really the frontline kind of ministry. So if God's really speaking to your heart about being involved, our first step is show up. Show up.
You don't have to call anybody. You can just show up.
Yeah, show up. Come here. Come out in front of the abortion clinic with us. Find out when the abortion days are. You can usually find out through the pregnancy help centers. They usually know when the abortion clinics are actually doing abortions, and or they can contact us. And then we tell them, like on Tuesdays in the mornings from 8 to 11, this abortion clinic has anywhere from 10 to 20 couples coming in. And so we tell them to come on out, and we do a lot of on-the-job training. So what we do is we encourage them to come out with us and watch what we do. And there are a couple of sidewalk counseling programs available, and they can go online and see a couple of these. I think one's called Sidewalk Advocates. And we tell them go there and check out some of the materials that they have. And then we kind of have them watch what we do, and we talk. And so in between the couples coming in, which sometimes can be up to an hour, it gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of role play and walk through it with the new person that just came out. So it's actually on the job. And so we'll talk to them about that. We encourage them to read a book. There's a book called Tactics by Greg Kokel. We really encourage people to read that. And
I think we may have lost Don. But, are you there, Don?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good. You cut out for a minute. But Tactics by Greg Kokel is a book to kind of help you understand how. And I know he's a good apologist, a Christian apologist. And, to help people simply be able to present a message, I think that would be, I haven't read that book, but I know the author, and I think that would be helpful.
And what it does is a lot of people don't know where to start and what to say to someone, whether it's at the clinic or it's at a college or it's at the store or with your family at home. How do you start a conversation, and how do you keep the conversation from getting out of hand? And his book, Tactics, really helps you, a lot of basic things, but it helps you get the concept down that you don't, number one, have to know all the answers. And number two, you don't have to be intimidated when somebody comes up, like if a couple walks up and says, well, what are you going to do? I'm scared. My boyfriend and I, we don't want our parents to find out. And my parents would kill me if they knew I was here having an abortion. How do you deal with that? How do you do that? And like and the book Tactics, while it doesn't go into sidewalk counseling, it helps you how to have a conversation with someone, and it's built around asking questions. So I'll look at the couple and I'll say, listen, I know your parents would be mad and angry at you for coming to an abortion clinic. I get that. But how did you get yourself to this place? In other words, what kind of motivated you to think that this might be the solution? And then you find out where this couple's coming from,
Okay.
so that you can better talk to them. And
let me jump in, Don, because we're headed to a break here, and this is good stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This is where the rubber meets the road. So we will continue our conversation with Don Blythe after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest, Don Blythe, is right now currently outside a Planned Parenthood clinic in Walnut Creek, California. He is 35 years and many stories, many babies saved, and even 5 arrests, working in the pro-life movement to rescue babies from death. And also, as he mentions, women, because now in some states, and I know this was part of the New York law that passed this year, that now doctors don't have to be the one on hand to do the abortion. It can be nurses and practitioners of other sorts doing abortions, which is all that much more dangerous for women seeking abortion, and another reason to reconsider it, among many. But Don, thank you so much for being with us. And I do want to mention that at pointofview.net, you can see Don's picture and click through to the website At the Well and find out more. And if you want to get involved, you can find out how to do that and get to know this ministry. But I do see something called Project Truth, and I think it has to do with college campuses. And certainly the college campus is a place where a lot of young women are confronted with that abortion decision. So it's important that you're there. Tell us about Project Truth.
Oh, that's just a whole. I love the ministry we started through At the Well Ministries. We call it Project Truth. We go on to all the college campuses here on the West Coast that we can get to in a semester. And we go to college campuses and set up a display on the campus. One says, "Am I human?" and the other one says, "Is this inhumane?" And it shows a picture of a baby in the womb, and it shows an aborted baby the same age. And we encourage the students. We have a great brochure that you can see on my website. It's a brochure called Unlocking the Truth, and we designed it purposely for college, the college setting. And we go on to college campuses, and every 2 years we try to do every college campus. In fact, we've been on Kirby Anderson's Berkeley, UC Berkeley. We've been there 3 or 4 times. And we go on to the college campuses.
So
and
have you been to, do you go to schools in Southern California too?
Yes.
Okay. Because
I
graduated from University of Southern California. Have you been to my campus?
We haven't been to USC, but we've been to UCLA. We were just there a couple weeks ago to start a summer school. We were at UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton, Cal Poly Pomona, and we go down to all the colleges.
What happens at the colleges? Do you get opposition from administrations?
Oh, Penna, it's a whole nother hour a show. It's one of the most fantastic things that I've ever wanted to be a part of in my life. We spend 2 days on the campuses from 9 to 2 in the afternoon, and we set up. And there's been times when we've, faced opposition, but we were just on San Francisco State where we got really opposed. But the administrations over the years have learned, we call it educating the educators, to show them that, yes, we do have a right to be on the campus. Yes, we can be here. It's a public place. And I usually try to call the college ahead of time and let them know we're coming. But we have had incredible results on college campuses, handing out anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 brochures, students reading them. I've had college professors at a few of the colleges actually invite me to come into their classes, their sociology class, and give my presentation and
Fantastic.
Then take questions. Oh, man, the things that have happened in the college outreach, if any of your listeners are near a college and say, boy, I'd sure like somebody to bring a team to our college, they should contact me, because I think we're probably 30 years too late doing this. We've been doing it about 12 years now, but we should have been doing this back in the 70s, going on to college campuses, because most people thought you couldn't do it. Well, you can't be on a college campus.
Only Planned Parenthood could be there.
It's a public place. And so Stanford made the mistake of opening up a free speech zone on their campus. And so we've even been on the Stanford campus, which is a private college. You can't go on a private college, but they opened up a spot and called it the free speech zone. So we went and set up our display there, and the vice president came out and said, you can't be here because it's a private school. I said, oh, no. You call that a free speech zone. So that's not just for students. And so he goes, oh, maybe we ought to change our policy. But we go on public. That's right. Well, he left us alone. He didn't bother us because he knew we were right. But and we have really good attorneys. It's taken years to get them, but we have really good attorneys with Life Legal Defense Foundation. They're really good, it's just a fantastic ministry when a college professor will say, "Here, come and take on my my students and open up, he tells them, listen to Mr. Blythe. He has a good presentation. He's only going to take about 20, 25 minutes. Then you can spend the next half hour, an hour asking him questions. And that's where this whole idea of this isn't really rocket. I say it's not rocket surgery, but it's not rocket science. You just talk to the people, and you have your tools in your toolbox. And when someone walks up to you and says, hey, people should have a right to do whatever they want with their bodies, instead of me giving them well, let me tell you, I just look at them and I say, well, explain that to me. What do you mean by people have a right to do with their bodies what they want? Do you think there should be any limits on what people should be able to do with their bodies? Well, nobody's ever asked that question to a pro-choicer who parrots those words. So when you ask them a question, they kind of go, yeah, people should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies. I go, really? So do you think people should be able to drive down the street drunk with their bodies in their own cars? No. Well, now wait a minute, I'm confused. And so the Bible
asking
says
questions.
the Bible says tear down their strongholds. Mm-hmm. And so you tear down their strongholds, which are these silly sound bites that they've come up with. And by doing that, you then can put in truth into their lives. That's what Jesus did. In Luke, it says that they found him in the temple. And what was he doing? What's the Bible say he was doing in the temple? He was asking questions and listening. And I went, wow. And then the next verse says, and they were astonished at his wisdom and understanding. Here it is, Jesus at 12 years old asked questions and listened, and then he put truth into them. Even by the questions he asked, he put truth in them. So when a woman says to me, I should be able to do with my body what I want, I look at her as she's walking into the clinic, because you have about 20 seconds, and I look at her and I say, listen, that little body inside you is not your body. That little baby inside you has a heartbeat right now, Mom. Right now, that baby has a heartbeat and thinks he's safe inside you. Think about that. You're not aborting your body. You're aborting another person's body. And that little baby loves you and wants to be protected by you.
Wow,
and boy,
Don,
if you
that's
say
powerful.
that to somebody, that pricks their conscience.
Don, you are delightful, and I am just so glad that we had this conversation today. I wish we had another half hour to continue it, but I do want to lead people to pointofview.net, to your website, to At the Well Ministries, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm glad that all of you got to meet this man who's been in this wonderful work for so many years. Don, I hope you'll come back. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It wasn't long ago it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. We have a packed show today, a lot of guests, so interesting, and really sort of a lot of threats to the culture that are cropping up that we want to share with you and make sure you understand what we're facing here. And, you know, here at Point of View, we have a website and we try to post articles that correspond with the topic that we're discussing and with the guests that we are interviewing. And so for this next topic, which is a program that HBO released beginning last month called Euphoria, I've got a stack of articles in front of me. And one's from The Hollywood Reporter, HBO's explicit Euphoria courts controversy, how much teen sex and drugs is too much. That's the headline. The New York Times, Euphoria review, HBO raises the stakes on teenage transgression. Washington Post, with rampant drug use and graphic sex scenes, Euphoria is the latest teen TV show that isn't actually meant for teens. Well, yes, it is. HBO, this is CNS News, HBO drags Disney star into the gutter. And there are many of these. The one I finally decided to post because it had probably the fewest words that I didn't want to say on the air is from Fox. New HBO series Euphoria sells graphic adult content to teens and preteens, Parents Group says. So you can read about it there. I do want to introduce my guest. He is Tim Winter. He is with the Parents Television Council. He's worked in media. He was 15 years with the NBC. He helped start and create MSNBC. He also worked at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Now he's in the good work of trying to, and it's a tough job, but trying to clean up television. Tim, thank you so much for joining me.
Penna, good day to you and your listeners from Los Angeles. It's a pleasure to be back on the horn with you.
It's good to have you. And last time, you told us about a show that was so disturbing and I think surprising to a lot of people that was put out by Netflix, 13 Reasons Why, that glorifies suicide, really. And I saw something that came across my email today about Netflix. You were praising Netflix for something, and still we've got the problem of 13 Reasons Why, don't we?
Yeah, 13 Reasons Why is a teen-targeted television show that most parents have never heard of, but I assure you, if you have a teenager or a preteen, they've heard of it, and most have probably watched. It's a show that romanticizes suicide. It had the most graphic scene we've ever seen produced in Hollywood ever for a suicide scene. And now we have actually Netflix saying they're going to remove tobacco use from some of their shows because they find it's harmful to children. And we're saying, well, that's good that you find that tobacco use is harmful to children, but isn't a woman slitting her wrists also harmful to children? There's a tremendous double standard going on at Netflix.
Yes, there is. And I do appreciate that you try to get to know the executives in these media companies and speak with them. And, you know, most of them are parents, so you can relate to them on that level to appeal to them. So has anything transpired since you and I talked about 13 Reasons Why with regard to that?
Sadly, no. The only thing that has transpired, I think, since we last spoke is increasing pressure on Netflix to cancel 13 Reasons Why, because it has been directly linked to an increase in suicide among children in America. as soon as that show was released, the rate of suicide for teenagers in America went up 30%. And so that is very powerful data coming from the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and that is putting more pressure, I think, on Netflix to reconsider what they're doing. As you were so kind in your introduction to me, I've spent my whole career working in and around Hollywood, and we do try to reach out to executives directly and have a dialogue with them. Sadly, I get the all too familiar response that, well, I'm a responsible parent, and I don't allow my children to see what I produce and distribute.
Great.
Which you scratch your head and you think, well, are you proud of that? And the sad reality is, their kids probably do watch. It's just that the parents don't even know it.
Yeah. Well, this new show on HBO, Euphoria, I mean, just what I read about it, I haven't seen it, but it's jarring with graphic nudity and with violence, drugs, and even the star, Zendaya, who was with Disney, and she brings her fan base now to this show. She issued a warning before the premiere of the show, saying this, it's not for everyone, and others have also done so, but they still continue to push this type of stuff out, don't they?
They do, and this is I'm now in a position where I want to be mindful to the audience I'm speaking to, your audience, your listeners. I don't want to offend them, and just as you said, you posted something on your website, an article that you could actually share with your listeners. What we're about to talk about is a television program that is one of the most explicit we've ever seen on HBO. It is deeply troubling on many levels, not just the content, not just the drug use, the graphic sexual content, the violence, the profanity, the disrespect for any sort of, the nihilistic tone of the show. But then you talk about Zendaya, the Disney star, we understand that when you are a Disney star and you grow up, you want to move out of that genre. But she's taking with her a whole audience of young girls into this show that is very explicit. It's also being distributed on HBO, which has an app that allows anyone who has the app to watch anywhere, anytime outside of their parents' view. So, and then you have the tremendous hypocrisy from the program's creators about what the show is really intended to do. You're right in saying, I appreciate you pointing out that Zendaya said early on, this is not for everybody. This could be triggering for some. They also had the creator of the show, we were just talking about 13 Reasons Why a moment ago, the suicide show. There's actually an HBO executive who said, we're going to make 13 Reasons Why look like an after-school special.
Oh, great.
This show. I mean, wow, congratulations. Is that really what you want to hang your career hat on? Do you want to make 13 Reasons Why look like an after-school special compared to the content on this show? Anyway, you get me up on a soapbox, you start me talking, I can't be quiet.
Well, that's why we have you on. Tim Winter with Parents Television Council is with me. And folks, we're going to talk more about this idea that some of these TV executives want to portray reality. And that's when you ask them or when they're interviewed about this, that's what they talk about. This is authentic. This is someone's story. And the creator of Euphoria, who is the son of a very successful producer, Barry Levinson, Sam Levinson, said parents will freak out at this show, but it's drawn from his experiences as an addict. And so somehow that's supposed to make it okay that this actually was someone's story. And yes, television is about telling stories, but there is a responsibility with regard to what these companies put out there. And we're going to discuss this more. What can we do as parents, as grandparents, as concerned citizens? Is there anything we can do? We feel very helpless when it comes to the type of stuff that is out there, especially for our kids who are susceptible to these messages. We're going to continue our conversation with Tim Winter of Parents Television Council.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When you were in civics class, you probably learned this formulation. The legislative branch makes laws, The executive branch carries out laws, and the judicial branch interprets laws. Justice Neil Gorsuch is using various Supreme Court opinions to return back to that constitutional order. Part of the problem is that various members of Congress have been willing to cede power to the executive branch. Sometimes that makes sense when bureaucrats need to have some discretion in how to implement certain rules and regulations. In most cases, Congress has decided to abdicate its rule in our republic. One notable example was the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare. On page after page, you could read phrases like, "as the Secretary shall determine." The Secretary of HHS was given enormous power and authority in how to implement the law. Her department ended up issuing 12,000 pages of regulations based on the original law. In a number of opinions, Justice Gorsuch has been essentially saying to Congress, do your job. In his latest opinion, he criticizes Congress for writing a vague federal statute dealing with prison sentences. His argument is that a vague law is no law at all. He criticizes lawmakers for statutory language that provides no reliable way to determine which offenses qualify as crimes of violence. I predict this problem with Congress will get worse. One member of Congress that I interview warns about these message bills written by Democrats in the House. The bills are poorly written because they are merely intended to send a message. They don't expect the Senate to approve them or for the president to sign them. As more and more of these vague bills are passed, the sloppiness will extend to other important pieces of legislation. So Justice Gorsuch will have his work cut out for him. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Tim Winter of the Parents Television Council. We're talking about Euphoria, which is a program that it really launched last month on HBO, and it's pretty graphic, and it pushes an envelope that didn't really need to be pushed, I don't think. And it's so interesting as I've been reading about it. The teens, if you look at Gen Z, they're not having as much sex. They're not doing as much drugs. And we ought to all be happy about it, Tim. But instead, this type of stuff is being pushed. And I want your take on why. Why are executives of these Hollywood conglomerates trying to sexualize our teenagers?
I don't think that anybody wakes up in the morning and decides, how can I hurt children here in Hollywood? I do believe that people are mindless when it comes to understanding the impact that their actions have on children across America, around the world. Oftentimes you have a distorted sense of reality from some of the folks. I think Mr. Levinson, the creator of this show, talks about how messed up his childhood was. And if his childhood was anything like what his show is really about, then God bless him. I feel so bad about what he must have undergone. But what they're doing now is normalizing the most extreme possible behavior. They're taking content that is at the most extreme and trying to normalize it as routine. And I don't think that there's an intention to hurt kids. I think it is I don't want to say it's something pathological here with some folks in Hollywood, but I think they get in their own heads that well, this is my experience, this is what I think, and therefore, I have a platform and I'm going to use it. And somewhere along the way, the accountability isn't just to those who create this content, but also those who underwrite and distribute the content. And that's why we're so concerned now about HBO and its parent corporation, AT&T.
So when I also saw some interviews where executives would say, well, these are really meant for mature audiences. They're not meant for kids. But that just doesn't seem to be possible. Why would you have a teen star from Disney come and star in your show, bringing her audience? You've got all these young people acting in it, so much so that you have to have a counselor on the set to make sure that the sexual scenes aren't too difficult for these kids to perform. I mean, it's over the top.
Yeah, you'd think that if they have to have a counselor on the set when they're producing the show, that maybe it's not a good idea to actually produce the show. But of course, that's somehow that doesn't register with some of these folks here in town. But what you've said is exactly correct. You have, when you look at what the number of things that are so hypocritical about what's being said here. The original line was, well, this is going to allow parents to understand what it's like to be a teenager today. But yet they say that parents are going to be freaked out. Parents of who? Parents of adults? Parents of the adults who are supposed to be watching the show? They say it's not intended for teens, and yet they're overtly marketing it to teens. They are on their own website, on their own Twitter feeds, guiding children, teenage children and younger, how to watch the show on their HBO apps getting around a parent's oversight. And you have, as you said a moment ago, a Disney star who's basically one of the creators behind the show and the star of the show. Who does she bring along with her but a very young crowd? And by the way, who watches shows about high school kids? It's other high school kids and junior high school kids.
Yeah. I'm going to open up the phones, 800-351-1212. We only have a few more minutes with Tim Winter, but if you have a question for him or a comment, please give us a call very quickly, and we'll try to get to that, because, this is something that I think touches people's kind of psyches and hearts across America, because it used to be, and I remember in the early days of my time at Point of View, I would interview folks from Parents Television Council, and there were a lot of challenges for us out there with cable and all of that. But now it can be so secretive and out of parents' control that we're under a whole new regime here, I think. And Tim, what can people do?
Well, the thing that I fear people will do is throw their hands up in the air and say, there's nothing I can do. We must speak up and speak out. Otherwise, this becomes the next normal, and something else is going to be even more shocking than this. I mean, Euphoria has, I've never spoken these words in this order, but this show has the first ever transgender statutory rape scene that we've ever seen in television. And if this becomes the new standard, what's next? We have to push back. We have to hold to account those who allow this material to be produced and distributed, and are the object of our outreach, our grassroots activism, is going to be Randall Stevenson. He's the CEO of AT&T. He is the leading executive of the parent corporation of HBO. HBO is owned by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was recently purchased by AT&T. So the CEO of AT&T has the wherewithal to take this show off of his distribution platform if he so chooses. He's a man who I am told is a man of faith, a man of conservative values, a man of family values. He is a Boy Scout leader and has been for years. So how can he reconcile this show with everything else that he purportedly stands for in his personal life? That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be asking Mr. Stevenson, how does this reconcile with your other views and your other principles? Because it can't, it doesn't, and it shouldn't be continued on the streaming platform, the outlet, the distribution outlet on television that you control.
Tim, do you publish his name and address on your website?
We don't yet. We will. We're actually just finishing up this morning here in California. We still have a half hour of this morning yet before it turns to this afternoon. And we'll be finalizing our letter to Mr. Stevenson. We're going to be publishing that hopefully tomorrow publicly. And we're going to ask every concerned American to sign on to this letter to him.
Okay. Maybe I'm thinking maybe in a few days I could just have you join me again very quickly so that we can lead people to go and, kind of back up what you're doing there with him. Once that's up on your website, I think that would be a good way to handle it. So we'll get in touch with you guys for that.
And in the meantime, make sure folks are learning about this explicit show so that they can share the word with their concerned family members. I mean, my concern really is that most parents have no idea that this is out there. They know that there's explicit stuff on the internet. They know that there are websites that the forbidden fruit that so many kids are tempted to go look for. But the difference between this and those other websites is that this is almost a validation that this is how the rest of families and parents in Hollywood believes. This isn't some illicit website with graphic content. This is a mainstream major corporation that validates to children all that other conduct that they know is wrong, and that parents instill as being incorrect. So that's why we're so concerned about this type of messaging that's targeting children.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame because the irresponsibility, they cannot be allowed to get away with it. I've got a quick call here. Andrea in North Carolina. Andrea, you've got to go quickly because we don't have a whole lot of time. Do you have a question for Tim?
Well, I just have something to say. The messages are deceit, murder, violence, nudity, sex trafficking, cyberbullying, no accountability, and that is on because I've watched it, AMC, Fox, A&E, Lifetime, HBO, Sci-Fi, even Hallmark.
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the place, but we're targeting one show. Hey, Andrea, thanks for your call. We appreciate that, and I know that you've called before and you watch the culture, but Tim, I think the point you make here, and we just make at the end, is that when mainstream companies are pushing this evil and sin on us, I mean, if we don't do something about that, then we're kind of far gone.
I'm just brokenhearted that some in Hollywood and at big major publicly traded corporations would ever believe that this is something that's acceptable. We understand that nobody wants to be censorial, and we want the creative community in Hollywood to have the ability to produce, its content without any censorship. But they're hiding behind the flag in many cases to produce something that is so harmful, so toxic, and they think it's okay. And we must not, just because you have a right to do it, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Tim Winter, Parents Television Council, thank you so much for being with me. We will get in touch and have you back soon so we can maybe be part of your efforts there in stopping this stuff.
Thank you, Penna.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, we're going to talk to somebody else who used to be from California. His name is Chuck DeVore. He's going to tell us why so many people are moving to Texas from California and New York.
In a digital generation, Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. There's a report out, a new Census Bureau report. It has to do with the 15 fastest growing cities larger than 50,000 people. And we've got a lot of listeners in the state of Texas. We've got listeners all over the country who are going to learn from this segment. But we're going to focus in on Texas because 7 of those 15 fastest growing cities are in Texas. The top 3 are Frisco, New Braunfels, and Pflugerville. Frisco's growth was 8.2%, some 11 times faster than the national rate of 0.7%. My next guest has written about this. His name is Chuck DeVore. The article is entitled, New Yorkers and Californians Can't Stop Moving to Texas. Why are they moving from blue states to states like Texas? And I just want to tell you a little bit about my guest before I bring him in. He is with the Texas Public Policy Foundation now, but he's a transplanted Californian, as am I. And he is vice president of national initiatives at the foundation. But before that, when he was in California, he worked in the aerospace industry. And then he became vice president of his company. He ran for the assembly and was elected in 2004. And so he was serving in public office there in California. And we can ask him why he came to Texas, what brought him here. We came here for actually a job 30 years ago almost. And I'm so glad we did. I can't believe that the things that have happened in California. But it's just more of a principle. The different types of economic policies that a state has affects so much. And right now, I think the dichotomy is so stark. The differences are so, they're just in black and white. So with me to discuss this is the Honorable Chuck DeVore. Chuck, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, great to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you. When did you come to Texas?
So I moved to Texas from Southern California in December of 2011. So I've been here for a few years now, and I certainly love writing about the differences between the two most populous states because demographically they're so alike. Both states are majority-minority states. I think a lot of folks don't appreciate that there are only 4 states where white non-Hispanics are the minority. That's California, Texas, New Mexico, and Hawaii. And the 2 states that are most like each other and most like what demographers predict the future of the country will look like are the 2 biggest states, California and Texas, where 1 in 5 Americans call home.
You know, it's funny because there's this other economist who wrote an article. Well, she's a California refugee. She just got here 3 months ago. And she says, don't California my Texas. So the states are alike, but a lot of Texans are worried that some of the political opinions are going to influence our policies as these people move here for jobs and for the economy. What do you think?
Well, I think that's certainly something to keep an eye on. But so far, the data from polling does not suggest that is happening. There was a poll done by UT Austin and the Texas Tribune back in March of 2013 when immigration from California to Texas was kind of at its highest point. And specifically, that poll looked at Californians who had moved to Texas. And they asked them about their political philosophy, and by a little more than 2 to 1, 57% to 27%, they were conservative versus liberal. Another very interesting poll was done in conjunction with the U.S. Senate race between Beto O'Rourke and
Ted Cruz.
Senator Cruz. And they specifically looked in this exit poll about how long have you lived in Texas? You know, were you born here or did you move to Texas? And then who did you vote for, right? That one was fascinating because native-born Texans supposedly voted for O'Rourke by 3 points over Cruz. It was 51% to 48%. But people who had moved to Texas, and almost half, about 42% of the sample size, were people who were transplants, which makes sense. Texas is attracting people from all over the country. The people who moved here voted for Cruz over O'Rourke by a huge lopsided margin of 57% to 42%. So just based on that CNN exit poll, you could argue that if it was up to native Texans, O'Rourke would be in the U.S. Senate right now. And so when you think about it, it makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, outside of Austin, Texas, which is kind of like a second Silicon Valley where there's a lot of people from the tech community and a lot of, obviously the city council here is very liberal. But by the way, it's been liberal for a long time, right? It's a government town. UT Austin is the flagship university, so you've got a lot of professors, a lot of employees of UT that are generally left of center. So the town's been liberal for a long time, and it's now more progressive, probably getting more so because of the reinforcements coming in from San Francisco and the greater Bay Area. But other than that area, by and large, most liberals do not want to live in Texas, right? Because Texas is perceived as this gun-toting, cowboy hat-wearing, rodeo-going, church-attending sort of place, and it's certainly not a place any self-respecting liberal would want to move to. So a lot of them choose not to.
Yeah, I guess it could probably be argued, too, that people who are native Texans may take things for granted, and they saw Beto O'Rourke as something new and shiny and interesting. And, I just saw neighbors that I couldn't believe supported him because I knew they weren't really that liberal. But let's go to why this population growth, why this move from blue states to red. It has to do with, of course, opportunity mostly, doesn't it?
Right. So there's a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, a state's growth, you have to look at natural birth, right, natural death, interstate migration, as well as international immigration, right? So all of those factors combine to determine how quickly a state's going to grow. In the case of California, which really had an amazing stretch from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, things have really slowed down. In the last couple of censuses, they only gained one congressional seat and then no congressional seats. And meanwhile, Texas has been traditionally growing at about double the national average for the last several decades, due to both higher birth rates, due to international immigration, and of course, interstate in-migration. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but if you look at the statistics, the ones that you can really draw a connection to are affordability of housing, which is largely determined by regulations and taxes and restrictive zoning. Places like Texas is a lot easier to build a house or to build an apartment complex or to build a strip mall or a high-rise than in places like San Jose, California, or Los Angeles. It just is. And as a result, things are a lot cheaper here. It isn't just the value of the real estate. It isn't just California's nice climate and beautiful mountains. A huge part of the costs of building in California are because of government regulations, and that causes people to have a lower standard of living. So that's one huge aspect. Another big thing is taxation. California has the highest individual income tax bracket in the country at 13.3%. They have a very progressive and steep income tax code. I know I used to be vice chairman of the Revenue and Taxation Committee in the State Assembly in California. And in the case of Texas, while our sales taxes and our property taxes are above average, we have no income tax. And so if you look at the migration of people within the country, and if you look at job creation, there's a very strong statistical connection between those two things and the tax rates in a state and in the land regulatory schemes. Is it easy to build? Are property rights respected, or are they not?
So your article says that California has the nation's highest marginal income tax rate and ranks in the worst 5 for state and local tax burden. Well, Texas has no income tax and ranks in the best 5 states for taxation. Means that Texas should continue to double California's growth in the years to come. Amazing. I'm not sure I'm ready for all that many people coming in, but it is definitely good news for our economy. Chuck DeVore is my guest, and we're going to continue this conversation. If you'd like to ask him a question or join our conversation on this issue, why are folks moving to states like Texas with no income tax and fewer regulations? from blue states. Of course, a lot of it has to do with just their personal economic well-being. Give us a call, 800-351-1212. So many other things happening in California, for instance. Well, not only a couple of earthquakes, which is really sad and rough for them, but homelessness growing in California. And, I know for a fact people I know there can't afford even an apartment. Lousy schools. Why are the schools so bad? As Chuck said, expensive housing and illness now, even typhus. We'll talk about all of that after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View. Check out the article that Chuck wrote at pointofview.net.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest is Chuck DeVore, and he is with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He was an assemblyman in California, in the legislature there. He moved here in 2011 to Texas, and he does have some opinions and actually backed up by a lot of economic data. And now a new Census Bureau report that people are moving from the blue states, New York, California, to Texas, and also other red states. And I mentioned homelessness before the break, Chuck, and I'm referring to a Wall Street Journal piece that was out recently. It's actually an editorial, The Troubles Beneath the Surface of California's Comeback, and it talks about homelessness. And really that the state is home to California, home to 12% of the U.S. population. And nearly half of the nation's unsheltered homeless now live in California. That's unbelievable. Why is it?
Yeah, and well, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, the West Coast in general is kind of a hotbed for homeless individuals, whether you're talking about unsheltered or chronic. These are, by the way, technical terms used by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for a number of years to describe certain types of homelessness. So in the case of chronically homeless, you're looking at people who either have been without shelter, without a home for a year, or a certain period of time within like a 3 or 4 year stretch. With unsheltered individuals, these are the individuals who don't even avail themselves of, let's say, going to the local Salvation Army shelter, or don't have any friends or family with whom they can couch surf. These are the people who live full-time on the streets. And so as that article pointed out, as well as an article I wrote in my Forbes column in early June about typhoid fever, typhus, and tuberculosis, are LA's medieval diseases coming to your city, I cited the HUD report, the most recent Housing and Urban Development report, that pointed out, as you've said, 49% of the nation's unsheltered individuals are in one state, California. And so a good reason for that, a good explanation for what's going on there, is the perfect storm of three different things that happened in the space of about 5 years. You had a 3-judge federal panel that told California, you've got to get rid of 40,000 people in your prison system. And because they were in the liberal Ninth Circuit, you had this sort of a decision that in other states, wouldn't have been thought of more than once. And so California lawmakers, led by Jerry Brown, really didn't want to build any more prison space. And they loved the fact that you had a 3-judge federal panel that told them what to do, what they wanted to do anyway, so they could pass the blame off on the judges rather than on their own political decisions. And so what they did was they passed a bill that said, okay, here's 60% of the cost. You have to take, for the counties, you have to take these 40,000 prisoners. You don't have enough money to house them all, so you have to figure out who to release at the county level. And so that was very rapidly followed by Proposition 47 and 57, which downgraded penalties for low-level drug possession, as well as things like shoplifting. And what ended up happening then was that if you're a small-time drug user and you're stealing to support your habit, you're shoplifting, the threat of jail time now is very minimal, maybe a day. And as a result, the state's drug courts no longer have any teeth to encourage people to go through rehab and treatment. Because it used to be that you'd go to drug court for minor possession, and they'd say, look, here's the deal. You got to go through rehab or treatment, or you have to be in jail for 6 months or a year. Well, now there's no more jail or for 6 months or a year. It's just one day. Wow. In many cases. And so what's happening now is you have people who are chronically addicted to drugs. They're doing a lot of petty theft to support that, and they're living in the streets in squalor, and there's really nothing right now that law enforcement can do about it, because if they arrest any of these individuals, they're only going to spend the night in jail and be right back out on the street. And so what's happening is the situation from a public health standpoint is very rapidly deteriorating, and you're finally starting to get some very left-wing, progressive individuals that are even suggesting that, well, maybe we should go back to involuntary commitments. Go back to the days when we had large state-run mental institutions, because they're getting tired, frankly, of stepping on human waste in these cities with people that are strung out on heroin or meth or what have you, and frankly, spreading diseases that have no place in a modern first world country like America.
It seems like that in itself will could just continue the bleeding. I mean, why would you stay in a state where there's that filth? I mean, it's in the cities, so it's the people that live in the cities that are affected.
It is possible to avoid it, right? So if you're in one of the nicer suburbs, unless you have to go downtown for a reason, like you're going to go to the theater or you have a medical appointment with a specialist doctor, in many cases, people don't have to go to San Francisco or Los Angeles or San Diego. But you're right; it does wear on people, and it certainly can't help the morale of people who are there, given how much they pride themselves on their left-of-center policies, right? I mean, this is a state that has big government and big taxes and big regulations, and also has the nation's highest supplemental poverty rate, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. I mean, a lot of your listeners may not appreciate that the old official poverty rate that's been around for some 55 years does not take into account the differences in the cost of living from state to state. So other than Alaska and Hawaii, the poverty threshold is the same in, let's say, Manhattan as it is in Lubbock, Texas. And that's ridiculous. I mean, what are the rent differentials between Manhattan and Lubbock, right? 5, 6 times?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the poverty level is the same in each location. So the supplemental poverty measure, which has been published by the Census Bureau now for 10 years, takes that into account, as well as the value of non-cash government assistance like Section 8 housing vouchers and food stamps, now called Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. And under that new measure, California has always had America's highest rate of poverty. Proportionately, it's about 29% higher than it is in Texas, which is, again, amazing given that both states are majority-minority states. So clearly, something about California's big government style isn't working for the most vulnerable of Californians.
I'm not going to be able to take calls, ladies and gentlemen. I have to apologize because there's not a whole lot of time left in the segment, but I do want to ask one last question, Chuck, and that is, you've given us some of the lessons we can learn from this phenomenon that's taking place, but can you boil it down to, you're talking to Texans. We've got listeners in the Carolinas, in Florida, in Georgia, conservative places. What can they learn from this?
I think the most important thing to do is to have a kind of a humble attitude toward government. Government cannot solve these problems readily. And when it tries to solve these problems, there's so many unintended consequences that have a ripple effect in the economy and with prosperity and with crime. The best thing that you can do is to have strong families, strong communities of faith, put your effort into your neighbors, and help them out, and do what you can to improve things where you are on your own, rather than turning to big government to help, because it'll appear to be helping in the short term, but in the long run, what will happen is that you'll see your job base begin to wither away, and you'll see individuals for whom it's just their job to help people and collect a nice paycheck while doing it. That's not as flexible and responsive as what nonprofits can do to help people at the local level.
Yeah, and what small businesses thriving can do. They can provide jobs. Chuck, thank you so much for joining me today, and really for all the sense that you make. I really appreciate this half hour, and I hope you'll come back and join us again.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, next up, for the next hour, we're going to discuss the transgender agenda. Peter Sprigg will join me next, and after that, we're going to talk with a mom in Arlington, Virginia, that's battling the schools. You will not want to miss her story. We'll see you.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. Thank you for sticking with us for this program that's been filled with, in a sense, chronicles of threats to the culture, and it's not going to stop in this hour. In the final half hour, we're going to be joined by Maria Keffler, and she's a mom in Arlington, Virginia. She's been heroically with another group of her friends battling sort of an agenda in the Arlington public schools. And really, they have a policy, they call it an accommodation procedure, wherein transgender students are given preferences and privileges that deny other students their rights, like Title IX protections for girls, privacy rights for both boys and girls. This is a quote from our guest in the final hour of Point of View, and this type of agenda is being battled all over the country, but there are certain places that are sort of out there as experimental areas of the country where these things are being pushed, and Arlington's one. So we will talk to Maria Keffler, who's fighting back, but it's a difficult road. But now I think we can speak with someone who can get us to the bottom of some of this. Why is this happening? He's somebody who I've loved interviewing over the years, Peter Sprigg. He's senior fellow for policy studies at Family Research Council, and he really majors on the areas of marriage and family and human sexuality and religion and public life. He's an ordained minister himself, but he's been at FRC for 18 years. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you, Penna. I'm glad to be with you.
I'm glad you're here. And, you know, things have gone perhaps way beyond where I thought they would go when I was interviewing you back in the 90s, or at least in the early 2000s.
The early 2000s,
I mean, we didn't think we'd have the T at the end of LGBTQ. We didn't think we'd have the T, did we?
No, I think that the explosion, really, of the transgender movement has been probably a big story since it happened. It began almost instantaneously after the Obergefell decision in the Supreme Court redefining marriage. Once the LGBT movement had won that major goal, they immediately turned to an even more radical goal, which was redefining our whole relationship with our biological sex. And so over the last 4 years, we've seen this explosion of the transgender movement.
There's so many things that don't compute with regard to this, and one of them was pointed out in an article that I ran across that you wrote, and it's trans activists, we're normal, but you must pay to fix us. So in a sense, you're saying that homosexuals, they didn't think anything was wrong with them. They don't want us to fix them. Transgenders, they don't want us to think there's anything wrong with them or any kind of disorder, but governments, insurance companies, and just private businesses are being asked to put out all sorts of money to fix them, aren't they?
That's right, yes. So this was an article I wrote about dealing with what you might call the politics of diagnosis. And in fact, there was a book some decades ago that used that as its subtitle. That book was dealing with the issue of homosexuality, but the more recent news story had to do with the issue of transgender status. And as you indicated, the homosexual activists, one of the first really seminal victories of the homosexual activist movement was the decision in 1973 by the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, known as the DSM, and basically declared that no, homosexuality is not a mental disorder. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that was not a decision based on science. It was a response, a capitulation to a very vigorous and even vicious campaign waged by homosexual activists, and it was very successful. But as you indicated, for homosexuals, they don't want any treatment. They don't think they need any treatment. But the situation is a little bit more complex for transgender people. They also don't think there's anything wrong with them. They don't want the stigma of being described as having a mental disorder. But at the same time, they do want treatment. They want medical treatment in the form of hormone therapy and, in some cases, gender reassignment surgery. Now, they could pay for those things themselves, but that's very expensive. So what they would prefer to do is have you and I pay for them through our insurance premiums or through our taxpayer dollars by having these to be declared medically necessary. So this is kind of a little catch-22 for the transgender movement is they don't want people to think there's anything wrong with them, but they do want other people to pay for the surgery and hormone therapy that they see as necessary treatment for their condition.
My guest is Peter Sprigg from Family Research Council, and if you would like to ask him a question or make a comment about this subject, the number's 800-351-1212. So, Peter, it was called gender identity disorder, but this is not acceptable anymore and has been officially changed?
Well, there are... what further complicates this is that there are sort of two, I wouldn't say competing, but two different authorities that some medical professionals rely on for these diagnoses. One is from the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM, which I mentioned. The other is published by the World Health Organization, and it's called the International Classification of Diseases, or ICD. So they tend to kind of overlap, but they're not necessarily always the same. Well, back in 2013, 6 years ago, the APA changed their manual, the DSM, and removed gender identity disorder and replaced it with what they called gender dysphoria. They said simply to experience what they call gender incongruence, just having this sense that your psychological gender is different from your biological sex of your body is not in itself a disorder. That's gender incongruence. But if you feel subjective distress about it, then that subjective distress is a problem called gender dysphoria. So if
you don't feel that, then you don't have a claim on any of these surgeries or benefits?
Right. Theoretically, if you are a transgender person and you're perfectly happy about it and doesn't bother you at all, that you think my mind is different from my body, but that doesn't interfere with my functioning in any way whatsoever, then you don't have gender dysphoria and you're not diagnosable. So the problem there, it's a little bit, that was a step forward for the transgender activists achieving their goal, but that still means if you confess, so to speak, that you have gender dysphoria in order to get the diagnosis to get your treatment paid for, then you're still labeled as having a mental disorder, and they still didn't like that.
Okay.
So
let me jump in. We're on a we're coming up on a break, and we need to continue explaining this. It's a little complex. If you have a question or comment, 800-351-1212. Peter Sprigg is my guest. And, it just gets a little dicey now with regard to, it's hard to say that I am perfectly healthy and normal, and yet I want you to pay for treatments for me to change who I am. That's a little hard argument to make, but amazingly enough in this culture, people are able to make it. So we've got to figure out how we get back to sanity. We'll do that after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When you were in civics class, you probably learned this formulation. The legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch carries out laws, and the judicial branch interprets laws. Justice Neil Gorsuch is using various Supreme Court opinions to return back to that constitutional order. Part of the problem is that various members of Congress have been willing to cede power to the executive branch. Sometimes that makes sense when bureaucrats need to have some discretion in how to implement certain rules and regulations. In most cases, Congress has decided to abdicate its rule in our republic. One notable example was the Affordable Care Act known as Obamacare. On page after page, you could read phrases like, "as the Secretary shall determine." The Secretary of HHS was given enormous power and authority in how to implement the law. Her department ended up issuing 12,000 pages of regulations based on the original law. In a number of opinions, Justice Gorsuch has been essentially saying to Congress, do your job. In his latest opinion, he criticizes Congress for writing a vague federal statute dealing with prison sentences. His argument is that a vague law is no law at all. He criticizes lawmakers for statutory language that provides no reliable way to determine which offenses qualify as crimes of violence. I predict this problem with Congress will get worse. One member of Congress that I interview warns about these message bills written by Democrats in the House. The bills are poorly written because they are merely intended to send a message. They don't expect the Senate to approve them or for the president to sign them. As more and more of these vague bills are passed, the sloppiness will extend to other important pieces of legislation. So Justice Gorsuch will have his work cut out for him. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Peter Sprigg from Family Research Council is with me. We're discussing his article, and you can go to pointofview.net and see it. It's Trans Activists Were Normal, but You Must Pay to Fix Us. And the subheading is Transgender Advocates Are Manipulating Medical Definitions to Get a Diagnosis without the stigma of having a mental disorder. And Peter's been explaining this. Peter, what I have seen, and I've interviewed Michelle Cretella before about kids getting diagnosed with gender dysphoria and being given some of these treatments at a very young age. The medical profession, you say, is moving more and more in the direction of offering expensive body-altering surgery as the primary solution instead of counseling to get at the roots of this discomfort, which is something we should have compassion for. But I think for many reasons, we should stand against the way the medical profession is going, because number one, these treatments are not necessarily good for people, especially kids. And second of all, what's wrong with counseling? I mean, that seems to be just forbidden today.
Yes. Well, You're absolutely right. There are two things to bear in mind. First of all, the argument that people who are transgender are not mentally ill. Well, maybe you could. How would you prove that when obviously there is a disconnect with their physical anatomy? But how would you prove that that's not a mental problem? Well, maybe if they did not have any higher rates of other mental health problems, any higher rates of depression or suicidal ideation or anything, if they were, just as well adjusted and healthy in other areas of their mental health as the average person in the general population, then maybe that would be an argument for saying, well, they don't really have a mental health problem. But that's not the case. In fact, they do have much higher rates of what are called psychiatric comorbidities, meaning that they have, regardless of what you think about transgenderism per se, there is no question that people who identify as transgender have much higher rates of other mental illnesses than people in the general population. So that's one factor. And then the next question is, does having these treatments, especially these medical treatments like hormone therapy and surgery, does it really help them? Now, presumably, obviously, these are people who have nothing wrong with their bodies. They have perfectly functional bodies, and yet they're doing these major alterations to their healthy bodies. So the purpose is not to improve their physical health. It's to improve their psychological health. And so then the question becomes, does it actually succeed in doing that? Are these, after surgery and hormone therapy, then can you say that transgender people are just as healthy as the general population? And the answer to that is also no. In fact, the research on outcomes shows that they continue to have very serious mental health problems as well as added physical health problems as a result of these procedures. So the idea, the evidence, the actual medical evidence, does not support any of these claims being put forward by the transgender movement.
Well, with kids too, I know that I've seen statistics that if you let them go through it, like sort of like a phase, like a lot of other things that happen to kids, if you let them just, even if you didn't get counseling, if you just wait it out a little bit before giving these hormones and puberty blockers and things, most of them will just pass into normalcy.
Well, this is an issue as well. Because we all know in other contexts, I think it wouldn't even be considered controversial to say, well, children are exploring their identities. Teenagers, adolescents are in a process of identity exploration. They don't know who they are yet. You can also say many times people in adolescence are not happy with their bodies. They're not comfortable with their bodies. They don't like the way their bodies look. Okay, that's true of many, many teenagers. So to take people who are having those kind of normal adolescent experiences and all of a sudden say, well, maybe you're in the wrong body altogether. Maybe you need to change your body rather than saying, look, you're fine. Your body is fine. Everybody's different. It's okay to be exploring who you are. It's okay to have a body that isn't perfect, but you don't have to make these radical changes when you're at a very young age. And so that's where most people go through that kind of struggle in adolescence, and then they come out of it. And that's true of people who are struggling with their gender identity as well, unless they are sort of locked into a transgender identity by having these medical treatments or gender transition at a very young age.
Yeah, and there's so much affirmation going on in schools, too, which we'll discuss in the next half hour. But let's go to John calling in from Georgia now. John, thank you for calling. You're on with Peter Sprigg. Are you there, John? Hello. I guess we don't have him right now. Steve, let me know if he does come back. I've got a lot of questions for Peter, so...
Well, Penna, can I finish expling about what the World Health Organization did?
Yes, please do. That's right. I forgot to get back to that.
I had mentioned that the American Psychiatric Association changed their diagnosis in 2013 from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. Well, just this year, the World Health Organization changed their diagnosis, and they've taken it out of the category of mental disorders altogether and put it in a category of conditions related to sexual health. So they've managed to make it not a mental health problem. And so what are they calling it? They're calling it gender incongruity. which was the very thing that the American Psychiatric Association said in 2013 is not a mental disorder. So
are they saying that's a physical disorder?
Well, they seem to be implying that that it's a physical disorder, although this classification of problems related to sexual health was actually created for this condition. In other words, it's not a classification that existed before, as if I understand it correctly. They deliberately created a separate classification in order to remove it from the mental health category. And so it just shows the extent to which they will go to achieve the socio-political outcome that they desire, as well as the financial outcome in terms of making us pay for these procedures.
So, Peter, we live in a world right now where it's becoming illegal, and I wish John was still there because I think his question was about this, illegal to or just not acceptable to rely on what's scientifically observable in people. And, are we ever going to get back? I mean, what do you see? You look at these trends. Are we ever going to turn back and say, you mentioned Obergefell. I can't see that our country's ever going to go back to not allowing two men to marry. But I can see, if you look at people's physical bodies and how they work and how they operate, I can see that we could just get through this nonsense and maybe back to some medical normalcy. What do you think?
Well, I do think that there's a limit to which you can defy reality.
Yeah.
And that's really what the transgender movement is about. It's defying reality. Our biological sex and the bodies we are born with, they are a reality that cannot be changed and cannot be avoided forever. And I think we're seeing some of this backlash. We're seeing this sort of unusual alliance or coalition between some conservative pro-family groups and radical feminist groups, for example, who are in agreement that we should celebrate women's bodies and not say that women have to pretend to be men, and protect the privacy of women in restrooms and locker rooms and so forth. We may disagree on a lot of things, but we have common cause on that.
Well, I think also the idea of men competing on women's sports teams.
Yeah, this is another. Yeah, that's another area where it's just irrational because there's no way that the average woman can compete with the average man, or even that an elite female athlete can compete with a non-elite male athlete. So this is it will literally destroy women's sports if this trend continues to grow. And I think eventually there will be a backlash. I mean, if we're all celebrating the U.S. women's Olympic soccer team, and if they were to go out 4 years from now and lose to a team, half of whom are biologically male, then I think Americans might begin to take a little different attitude.
Let's hope so. Hey, Peter, I've got to say goodbye because we're at the end of the segment. This has been fun talking to you. You make so much common sense on this issue. Keep talking, keep writing, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Penna.
You can see Peter's article at pointofview.net. We'll be back.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.org. pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Ladies and gentlemen, here at Point of View, ever since our program began many, many years ago, we have encouraged citizens who disagreed with certain policies in their communities to step up, band together, and fight back. And my next guest has done that. Her name is Maria Keffler, and she is from Arlington, Virginia. And they are facing something that is, just absolutely, unbelievably dangerous, not only to their kids, but also the culture. Maria is a former middle and high school teacher. She's the mother of 3 living in Arlington, Virginia. She's one of the co-founders of the Arlington Parent Coalition, which was just founded in March of this year to deal with this particular issue. She actually is on the line from her family vacation. I'm so grateful, Maria, you were able to take time away to talk to me because of a news item that I saw this week. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This is a really important topic, and more parents and citizens need to know what's happening.
Well, that's absolutely true, and you're to be commended because you're fighting a battle that we all are beginning to face. In Arlington, Virginia, of course, it came to light back in February, at least to you, that there was a new policy that was being floated in the Arlington schools. And in this article from the Daily Signal, it calls it an accommodation procedure. Actually, I think this may be from the policy, wherein transgender students are given preferences and privileges that deny other students their rights, like Title IX. Oh, this is your quote, protections for girls and privacy rights for both boys and girls. And parts of this policy would be access granted to bathrooms and locker rooms that correspond to a student's gender identity. Students would have the ability to participate in any co-curricular or extracurricular activity consistent with their gender identity. So I was just talking with Peter Sprigg about women's sports, and this was regulated by the Virginia High School League. Overnight school events would allow students to sleep in quarters consistent with a student's gender identity. Students would be allowed to use names and gender pronouns of their choosing that match their gender identity. And teachers would have to undergo training for this to keep up with transgender issues. So we're hearing this everywhere. But Maria, tell me about just how you got wind of this in Arlington and what you immediately felt you had to do.
Okay, well, back in February, a good friend of mine was looking around the Arlington School's website for some summer school information, and she came across a timeline that was buried 3 links deep under school board policies for a transgender student policy implementation procedure. A PIP is how to carry out or implement policy that's been established. So 4 years ago, in July, the school board voted in SOGI language, sexual orientation and gender identity language, into their non-discrimination clause. They did this in July after school was out, everybody was gone, and nobody really knew that it happened. Now, that in and of itself is not a problem. Nobody should be discriminated against. Kids who identify differently sexually or gender-wise should be treated well. They should not be discriminated against. But by establishing that policy 4 years ago, they now are writing this PIP, policy implementation procedure, and it's about how to carry out what does it mean to not discriminate. So my friend came across this in February, asked me, said there's a meeting tonight, school board working group meeting, will you go with me? So we went to that, and we were just shocked at what we heard. There were about a dozen people sitting around the table, teachers, students. Actually, I'm sorry, there were no teachers at that event, and one of the school board members pointed that out. There were parents, staff members, and students, and I believe a community member or two who were not necessarily related to the school, sitting around the table talking about what they wanted to see in this transgender policy. The biggest takeaway from that was that parents were perceived as a threat to their children. There was a lot of talk about hiding things from parents. If kids come out at school as either a different sexual orientation or a different gender identity than the parents know about, that the school needed to be able to hide that from parents. And we found that incredibly problematic, as well as some of these privacy issues that you mentioned. A child can identify as the opposite sex, and they get access to the opposite sex restrooms, opposite sex sports teams, opposite sex hotel rooms on overnight trips. So we felt like, wow, we've got to address this somehow.
Yeah. So what did you do?
A small group of us got together the next week, and we didn't really intend to form a coalition, but we said we've got to do something to push back against this. And the first thing we did was organize going to the school board members' open office hours. And we did a sign-up genius for that, and you had to have a name to put on it. So we said, let's call it the Arlington Parent Coalition. And so we started going to the school board members' open office hours and talking about this. And in the beginning, we felt like we were met with respect. We felt like they were at least listening, but nothing was really happening. And as we started digging deeper and finding out we had to submit FOIA requests to even see a draft of the PIP, of the policy, they were just not forthcoming. And so we said, you know what, we need a website. So we set a website up so that people could see what we were collecting. Okay, we did a Freedom of Information Act request to get the draft of the policy. Here's that. Here's what's happening in other school systems. And we started hearing from more and more parents, both in Arlington and outside of Arlington. We're now getting emails from all over the country from parents saying, oh my gosh, this is happening in my school. What do I do? And we're trying to help parents organize, help them push back. We're trying to find ways to help parents to support them to keep their kids safe in the public schools, because this is a political and a cultural ideology that's really being pushed from the bottom up. It's being implemented by activist teachers, activist staff, people who are looking at the school system as a place for a sociological experiment rather than as a place to teach kids reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so our first job was to try to push back on this policy. And we were successful in some things and not successful in others. The final policy, which was approved last week, is less aggressive. It has less egregiously troublesome language in it than the original draft that we saw. However, it was put into effect. One school board member looked at one of our parents, our Arlington Coalition parents, and said, we can do what we want. And
even though there's a policy there protecting your rights?
I'm sorry?
Even though there's a policy protecting your rights, they can do what they want?
Yes, the school board can, and they said that very clearly. They can do what they want. We spoke with an attorney who said, unfortunately, school boards do have the authority to enact bad policy. And that's just what they're doing, because this is a cultural, political move that makes them look good in the public eye at
Maria,
the moment.
was there even one school board member who saw your point or agreed with you or wondered that if these policies might be either privacy invading, parental rights violating, or just dangerous?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because early on we did feel like a couple of school board members were hearing us and were listening. One school board member pushed back on the timeline and said, we need more time to sort this out. There was a local special interest group, the Arlington Gender Identity Allies, who started pushing for this policy in September of 2018, and they wanted it done by the end of the school year. And one school board member early on said, why are we rushing this? We need to slow this down. And the Arlington Gender Identity Allies came back and said, no, we're not slowing this down. We're pushing this through. By the end of the process, we did not feel like we had any allies at the school board.
So do you think that Arlington or Northern Virginia is a target area, or is this cropping up and going on in a lot of places, even smaller communities than what you are?
It is popping up a lot of places. We talked to an attorney at the Alliance Defending Freedom a couple weeks ago. He said he knows of a couple of hundred school systems across the country who are dealing with this.
Wow.
David Aponte, who was formerly the co-chair of the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, he was the co-chair of the Northern Virginia chapter of that, was quoted in the Washington Post in June of 2018. And he said that California and Northern Virginia are serving as laboratories for policies related to sexual orientation and gender identity. Laboratory was his term.
Wow.
So there is an aggressive agenda being systematically rolled out. It seems to be being pushed on the coast, on the East Coast and the West Coast, and being rolled in middle America. It's coming. It's coming everywhere.
Okay, Maria Keffler is my guest. We've got to take a break. During the break, go to pointofview.net. You can read the story in the Daily Signal there, and also Maria's article in the Washington Post. Go there now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Maria Keffler, and she is part of, and she actually helped form the Arlington Parents Coalition. I'm talking Arlington, Virginia. And they're really in a battle that many school districts are in, and many should be in, because this is coming everywhere. And we've talked about this whole agenda for transgender affirmation. And some of the parts of it, of course, as we said, biological boys and girls into each other's bathrooms and locker rooms, no privacy. Boys being able to be on girls' teams. And we're getting a lot of stories about how unfair this is. And girls even losing out on college scholarships and things like that because there are boys competing against them. And then compelling speech using the transgender pronouns. But Maria, there's another part of this, and that is the curriculum. A lot of times when there's some sort of a progressive agenda in the schools, it's put into the curriculum because parents will want to opt out if it's just in a class. But it's throughout, even in math, isn't it?
Yeah. It's opt-outs alone are no longer really effective because the transgender ideology is being woven into every aspect of a child's day at school. And you can see the very systematic way this has been rolled out if you go to a website called genderspectrum.org. And in their toolkit for schools, they list 4 entry points, and they call it that. They call them entry points for getting this ideology into schools. And the first one is internal, and it's talking about changing the way people think, how people think about gender and sexual orientation. And you can see that in the language that's been adopted. We no longer have a sex. We have a sex assigned at birth. We no longer, have a gender. We are on a gender spectrum. They have really changed the language. The second entry point is interpersonal, how people talk to each other about it, how people interact around these things. The third was instructional, and that's the curriculum that you're talking about. And it's getting this into every class. And people have asked me, how can you get gender ideology into math class? Well, very easily by putting it in the story problems. You have transgender kids in the story problems. Anything revolving around history, history is being rewritten. A man who lived and never got married, well, the supposition is put in there he was probably homosexual or he was, probably transgender. And then the fourth is institutional, and that's what we're seeing with these policies and with like the HR 5, the so-called Equality Act, which is really an Inequality Act, which is seeking to change our understanding of sex as being, we've always understood it as binary. We're male, we're female. That is in every cell of our bodies in our chromosomal code. Well, they want to change that to include gender identity. And so once that happens, sex has no meaning because anyone can say, oh, I'm a biological male, but I feel I'm actually female, and that completely renders sex, maleness and femaleness, meaningless. And so these things have been very intentionally thought about, processed, progressed through, and it's been done very surreptitiously. Most people have no idea this is going on, and it's being couched in terms of love and acceptance and diversity, and everyone should be loved and accepted, and diversity is a good thing. Well, those things are true. Everyone should be loved. Everyone should be cared for. No one should be discriminated against. But when you're looking at a preferred gender affirmation model of care, which says you have to affirm what someone thinks about their gender with no consideration of their differences. It doesn't consider their age, their medical or psychological history, their family dynamics, the social conditions in which they're living. You are not allowed to look at those things. You must simply affirm the preferred gender. And I think we should consider very cautiously and critically claims of any one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare, but that is really the underpinning of this entire ideology, and it is being fed into our schools. It's being fed to our children. It's being put in the curriculum as early as kindergarten, as we saw in Arlington, and I know other schools around the country as well. In February, one of our elementary schools, Ashland Elementary School, hosted a transgender person reading the storybook I Am Jazz, which is a storybook. It's a true story of a child who medically transitioned from male to female. And they read that to 2 classes of kindergartners.
Amazing.
They sent a letter home a few days before the event. They sent it home on a Friday, 3 paragraphs of congratulatory language. Oh, we have this wonderful experience. Most parents had no idea it was happening, and this is what I mean when I talk about activist teachers and staff. That was done very intentionally, very surreptitiously to kindergartners.
Yes, parents definitely are the underdogs in the situation because, as you mentioned, 4 years of putting this into place without really much notice to parents, if any, and then it happens so quickly, and then no notices to parents of all these things, or very little notice. So, I know that part of your heart, Maria, is to help other people across the country, different school districts. And I want to ask you in a minute how people can find out more. But I do want to recommend one thing, and that is your Washington Post article that you wrote in April that tells this story very beautifully and very well. And I think everyone should read this because it will help you to recognize anything that might be happening in your community. It's called Gender Politics don't belong in the classroom, but Title IX protections do. It makes lots of sense. You're a good writer. And then the website Arlington Parents Coalition. But also, I know that you recommend that people demand, the parents, if you're going to demand anything, demand the scientific studies that show that this is all a good idea.
Yeah. There's a lot of contention out there about what best practices are for caring for transgender people. When you hear, the gender affirmation model is best practice, that is simply not true. There are a lot of different therapy recommendations out there. This one has been seized upon by activists for, I want to say, for some financial reasons. The number of gender clinics in this country has exploded. The first one opened, I believe it was 2012, and there are now, I believe, 48 in our country. So this is a booming business. And if you can medicalize a child, get them on cross-sex hormones early, they'll be medicalized for life, especially if they do have the sex change surgery, which is now being called gender affirmation surgery. Families absolutely need to know about this. And one of the first things I would say, if your child tells you that they believe they are transgender or non-binary, get help from someone that you know and you trust and you know what their background on this is. Because schools will tell you you have to affirm.
But you don't. You don't have to.
You don't have to. There's a lot of other ways to care for these kids. And in fact, Dr. Ken Zucker is a Canadian who worked in this field of sexual orientation and gender care for over 30 years. He's not a conservative, I think, by any stretch of the imagination. But he found in his research and his practice that compassionate care, he called it, compassionate care and watchful waiting, produce the best outcomes. Because
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. Studies routinely show 80 to 98% of children who question their gender identity pre-puberty, if allowed to progress through puberty naturally, 80 to 98% of them will align with their birth gender.
And parents need to be able to allow that waiting period. And that's what really the bottom line. Listen, Maria, thank you so much for joining me and just for taking the time out. You are doing great work, and we appreciate your sharing it with us. And we will send everyone through to your website for more information. You're doing something that really needs to be done in this country right now. So thanks for joining me.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.